These families value the finer things in life. You know what, Abe? I think you can take it from here. Wait, I think it's time for the open letter. But this background looks a little boring. Now this is much better. To jump right in, poetry and literature became the most important art form written in society in a more simplified version of Chinese. But I believe we're still missing something. Okay, that's better. So during this era, some of the most beautiful forms of poems were also created. So with that being said, here's the open letter. This perfectly still spring day, bathed in the soft light from the spread out sky, why do the cherry blossoms so restlessly scatter down? Although I am sure that he will not be coming in the evening light when the locusts shrilly call, I go to the door and wait. This poem reflects the role of women in the Japanese society during this time. Because they were less involved than men and were expected to be poised all the time, women often turned to their creative abilities, especially in terms of poems and other literature. So, to get back on track, the emphasis placed on living a life of luxury left the aristocratic court members scrambling to save a sinking bureaucracy. Families such as Fujiwara took advantage of this by marrying their daughters to elites in political positions. This type of leadership allowed the power of aristocrats as well as monks to rise, but still neither positions could compare to the amount of influence of local lords and families. There was oftentimes competition between aristocrats and local lords for land because that's what created power, meaning owning land meant controlling trade and labor. This division in society created a new type of land division that can be closely compared to many city-states. In these divisions, local lords were resided in small fortresses that were well protected. Also, warriors known as bushi were responsible for enforcing the laws, taxes, and overseeing public works. This became the most effective leadership militarily and politically. Bushi troops were also called the samurai. They were loyal to local lords, not just the royal, and were often used to protect the capital from robbers and keep monasteries from being attacked. These warriors devoted their lives to hunting, riding, and archery, while also fighting in elaborate battles. This profession was considered very honorable in Japanese society due to the warrior code called seppuku. This code stressed family honor and death rather than defeat. The formation of this position, however, did create rigid class barriers in society, which not only forced peasants to turn to Buddhism as their only resort to salvation, but also initiated feudalism in Japan. The decline began after the scholar gentry elite was taken by the reassertion of power by the aristocrats. Buddhism had also been changed by religious syncretism during this time. Political turmoil in China after the Tang made them less of an example as well. And finally, tensions, trade, and an eventual war allowed Japan to slip into an age of feudalism. Korea.
And now we will direct our attention towards the political and social influences of China on Korea. But before we jump right in, I think you should have a bit of background knowledge on the relationship between Korea and China. Early Korea was known as more of an appendage of China, being an extension of the Chinese mainland. The Korean peninsula was ruled by indigenous dynasties through most of its time, despite paying tribute to the reigning Chinese emperors. The people of Korea originally descended from hunting and herding peoples of eastern Siberia and Manchuria, representing a different ethnic blend than those of earlier centuries who identified themselves as Chinese. The peoples who moved into the Korean peninsula by the 4th century BCE acquired sedentary farming and metalworking techniques from the Chinese, the first sighting of Chinese influences on Korea. From there on, China began to have more involvement in early Korea, conquering the earliest Korean kingdom, Chosun, in 109 BC, and colonizing Chinese settlers who remained for nearly 4 centuries. Goguryeo established an independent state that went to war with Silla and Paikhachi, two southern rivals. This led to the first form of Sinification, the extensive adoption of Chinese culture in Korea after the fall of the Han. With this, Korea began to patronize Buddhist artists and finance the building of similar monasteries and pagodas, with Korean scholars traveling to China and India to find sources of Buddhism. This encouraged more of the spread of Chinese influence in Korea. Korea took on and introduced Chinese writing despite Korea's continued use of their own spoken language. The Goguryeo monarch of Korea imposed a unified law code based on that of the Han dynasty, and also established universities where Koreans were sent to learn and master Confucian classics and histories of China, rather than the histories and religions of Korea. In an attempt to expand his power and improve revenue collections, the monarch tried to put together a Chinese style of bureaucracy, but noble families rejected his attempt in associated with Chinese culture. Aristocrats, a part of these capitals, surrounded the throne and imperial government. These aristocrats were lucky to study in Chinese schools, with minorities submitting to the Confucian examination system introduced by the Silla rulers and influenced by earlier China. This led to education and art being popularly based on earlier Chinese traditions, which Jenny will continue to talk about later. Even after the conquering of Korea by new groups through invasion like the Yi in the year 1392, Chinese influences and links remained established in the Korean kingdoms.
As Japan was being influenced by China, Korea was equally being affected, politically and socially. In fact, Korea started out as an isolated civilization, which was then influenced by Chinese culture, the ways of life, and began to flourish. Korea started out having Buddhism as its main religion, as well as women having minimal rights, which continued after the Chinese influence. Korea was not as advanced as they were after Chinese influence for technology and trade. They had major agricultural, forestry, and fishing societies and lived humbly in their country surrounded by China. During the Silla monarchs, the monarchs wanted Korea to become a miniature Tang dynasty. Sinification, the adaptation of Chinese culture, occurred, and the Koreans, normally elite, were sent to China and looked at Chinese texts they took back to either improve or use in the Korean culture. The Koreans' regular attendance to these scholarly events made a prominent effect into the Chinese tributary system. The Chinese tributary system served as a major channel of trade and intercultural exchange between China. Koreans would as well as go to Chinese academies and Buddhist monasteries. Regarding artwork of Korea, the Chinese influenced the Korean culture by basically replicating their artwork or improving it. Going along with replication, Korea made pagodas and temples at the same location in high places, just like China did. Overall, Korea took the Chinese culture and improved it. For example, the Chinese artwork, specifically pottery, were renovated by the Koreans using oxide glazes. The art of printing was also improved. Using the new woodblock and movable metal types, Korea used honey to hold metal types